What is the creepiest disappearance case that you know about? In about 1971, a lady in Boca Raton reported her daughter missing. Her boyfriend was also missing along with his van. At some point over the years, she hired private detectives to look for the two. At one point she was told they were living in San Francisco. She was once told her daughter had a child. She never could understand why her daughter broke off contact and continued to look for her daughter. Along the streets in South Florida there are usually drainage canals that drain the Everglades to the ocean. Some are quite deep. In about 2000 they dredged a canal not far from her house and found the van. Daughter and boyfriend were both inside. All those years they were just down the street. At least she had closure. Brandon Lawson. He ran out of gas on the highway in the middle of the night and called his brother to come help him. Shortly after he called 911 and reported that someone had chased him into the woods and that he needed police. Eventually his brother and one police officer arrive at the scene and find his truck abandoned but no sign of Brandon. Brandon calls his brother and says he's bleeding and is 10 minutes away from his truck. That was the last anyone ever heard from him, and searches of the area turned up empty. The Jamison family. The Jamison family, 2 adults, 1 young daughter, was interested in purchasing a plot of land in Oklahoma. They drive out in their pickup truck to check it out. Truck is later found abandoned. $32,000 cash found in truck, along with the Jamisons' IDs, wallets, mobile phones, and a GPS. The family dog was also left in the truck, and was extremely malnourished. A camera is discovered. The final picture was of their daughter, 6-year-old Madison, who looks somewhat distressed. Security footage is uncovered, with the family appearing trance-like and not speaking to one another. The Jamison skeletal remains are found years later, dumped less than 3 miles from where the pickup truck was originally discovered. Remains show no signs of struggle. I remember reading about the disappearance of Susan Powell in a similar one of these threads a few months back. It's a wild story. Husband and wife, with 2 young sons, have a bad marriage. He's abusive and controlling, and at one point they had to move because the husband's father was in love with the wife. Things get so bad she starts fearing for her life. Then one night the whole family disappears, only to have the husband come back a few days later saying that he and the boys went camping and he had no idea where the wife was. As the investigation into what happened to the wife goes on, the husband acts more and more suspiciously, eventually moving with the kids to live with his father that they moved away from in the first place, but then lost custody of the kids because the father got caught with a bunch of child porn, and hundreds of creeper shots of Susan. Finally, during a supervised visit, the husband grabs his sons from the social worker, holes himself up inside his house and then blows it up, killing himself and both the boys. And all the while, they never solved the mystery of what happened to Susan Powell, and she is still listed as missing, although presumed murdered and dumped somewhere by the husband. It's a sad, crazy tale. One of the boys told the police that mom was camping with them or something about mommy being in the trunk. The Sodder children disappearance. On Christmas Eve, December 24, 1945, a fire destroyed the Sodder home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. At the time, it was occupied by George Sodder, his wife Jenny, and 9 of their 10 children. During the fire, George, Jenny, and 4 of the 9 children escaped. The bodies of the other 5 children have never been found. The fire was blamed on faulty wiring. However, one of the jurors involved in the inquest had, at one point, threatened George Sodder, saying his house would be burned and his children destroyed. The Sodders continue to question the official findings about the fire. They wondered why, if it had been caused by an electrical problem, the family's Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages, when the power should have gone out. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through in the fire, as they had initially thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole. A missing ladder belonging to the Sodders was found at the bottom of an embankment soon after the incident. A man whom neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft, and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire. However, no record identifying him exists, and why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder house while stealing the block and tackle has never been explained. Jenny Sauter also had trouble accepting Morris's belief that all traces of the children's bodies had been burned completely in the fire. Many of the household appliances had been found, still recognizable, in the ash. A local crematorium supported her theory. The truck's failure to start was also considered. George Sauter believed they had been tampered with, perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. The only bone fragments ever found on the site were a few human vertebrae fragments, although these were confirmed to have never been exposed to fire. The part where they got a letter from Italy decades later with a photo of a young man who would be about Louis' age that said Louis Sauter. I love brother Frankie. Illeal boys. A90132 makes it even weirder. The PI they hired to investigate that note seemed to vanish as well. Dorothy Jane Scott, young divorced mom working at a head shop. One day at a meeting a coworker falls ill, so Dorothy and another coworker take him to the hospital. It is found that he has a black widow bite. Following his treatment, Dorothy goes to get the car. When the co-workers make it outside, they see Dorothy's car speeding towards them. She doesn't stop, and that is the last time anyone sees her. The next day her car is found torched, but she is nowhere to be found. Over the next few years her parents start receiving taunting phone calls. Calls asking if Dorothy is home, a call claiming to know where she is, and so on. 4 years later a construction worker finds charred bones next to a highway. Upon forensic investigation it is learned that they are canine bones and the bones of Dorothy Jane Scott. It is deducted that they had been there for 2 years. Angela Hammond. While driving home, Angela Hammond stops at a phone booth to call her fiancé Rob and describes a creepy-looking man in a pickup truck in the parking lot. Her fiancé suddenly hears Angela scream and drives into town to check on her. He passes by a pickup truck and sees Angela struggling with an unidentified man, but after attempting a pursuit, the transmission on his truck gives out, and this is the last anyone ever sees of Angela. She still hasn't been found and went missing in 1991. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, I can't wrap my head around how at the same time practically anything you do is monitored, recorded and stored, but we somehow still manage to lose a whole effing passenger aircraft. Amy Bradley. She was on a cruise with her family. She was last seen asleep on the balcony of the cabin and was seen earlier in the night with the band on the cruise. She was reported missing shortly after the cruise docked. There was no signs of her on the ship or in the ocean. There were possible sightings of Bradley in Curacao in 1998 and 1999. 2 Canadian tourists reported seeing a woman resembling Amy on a beach in Curacao in August 1998. The woman's tattoos were reportedly identical to Bradley's. Bradley's tattoos included a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball located on her shoulder, the sun placed on her lower back, a Chinese symbol located on her right ankle, and a gecko lizard on her navel. She also had a navel ring. A member of the Navy stated that he saw Bradley in a brothel in 1999. He claimed she told him that her name was Amy Bradley and she begged him for help, explaining that she was not allowed to leave. I find it freaky just because of how terrifying human trafficking is. Rico Harris. He was a massive 6 feet 9 inches former Harlem Globetrotter basketball player who had drug issues earlier in his life, but had made a full recovery and was getting his life back on track. He was driving along California's Interstate I-5, from his home in Southern California to Seattle, to live with his girlfriend. He was somewhere just north of Sacramento, exhausted, and told his girlfriend over the phone that he wanted to check out the mountains. All calls stopped since then. His car was found a couple days later by a patrolman near a rest stop in the mountains. A massive search was launched. No signs of him. The strangest part. A driver later reported seeing a massive 6 feet 9 inches individual wandering down the highway, just a mile from where the car was found, a week later. A search was relaunched. Massive size 17 footprints were found in the ground that were not there before. They were getting very close, and then nothing. No trace, no body, nothing. Where did Rico go the first time he disappeared? Where was he for an entire week? And where did he disappear to again? The fact that someone could disappear twice is what makes this so darn mystifying to me. The 43 missing students from Mexico. I mean, singles get lost all the time, but effing 43 people are hard to lose, you might think. They found a mass grave with 28 bodies believed to be theirs, but after DNA testing none of those bodies matched with the 43's. Whoa, I think it's creepy that 28 people disappeared and no one seemed to notice. I'm sure there are stranger cases, but this one always creeped me out because I knew the guy. He and I were never friends but ran in the same circles and had a lot of mutual friends. One night he was hanging out at my buddy's place playing video games and left around 9:30 p.m. or 10 p.m. to head back to his apartment. His place was only 3 blocks away, but his keycard was swiped at the wrong building, identical towers next to each other, and he tried to make a phone call to a friend that only lasted 2 seconds but ended before our friend picked up. That was the last sign of where he was. When he didn't show up for classes the next day, our friends started putting out flyers. A few days later his family reported him missing, resulting in a massive search for him with helicopters, dogs, people walking all the fields near campus, the works. Not a trace was found, although it didn't help that it was snowing. Of course the police treated our mutual friend as a suspect as he was the last person to see him. He's the nicest guy, no one who knew him suspected him for a moment, and also said maybe he was drunk and fell in the river or something, but they weren't drinking that much by a long shot, so that didn't make sense. Months later his body is found in an old abandoned barn owned by the school about a mile off campus. Apparently he was curled up behind some equipment in the basement with his shoes at the top of the stairs. The cop's story is that he was out taking photos, got lost, fell down the stairs and died of hypothermia. They attributed the shoes to paradoxical undressing or him literally falling out of his shoes. Except that doesn't make any sense. According to my buddy he was hanging out with, he didn't have his camera on him. There's no mention of it in the police reports, and no sign that he ever made it back to his apartment to get his camera. Would have shown up on keycard records. In addition to that, you could see his apartment tower from the building he was found in, so being lost doesn't make much sense, and his body was already desiccated and partially decomposed when they found it, so I'm not sure how they knew hypothermia was the cause of death. He was also found to have cuts on his hands, and the room he was found in had been locked. The police claim that when he fell down the stairs he hit the door hard enough to unlock and open it, and cut his hands on the doors. Somehow. Personally I think he was murdered. Edit, this is John Lachina from Iowa State I'm talking about, in case you want to look it up. Edit 2, u/Magoo909 reminded me that a couple and one police officer actually searched that building a few weeks before his body was found and didn't see him. So either 3 people searched the building without noticing his shoes, the broken door and his body, or it was moved there later. The disappearance of Bobby Dunbar. In 1912 his parents took him fishing on a lake in Louisiana and he went missing. Police searched for him for 8 months, and finally found a man named William Cantwell Walters who was traveling with a boy that resembled Bobby Dunbar. Walters claimed the boy was the son of a friend who had given him custody, and that the child's name was Bruce Anderson, not Bobby Dunbar. Investigators and positive ID from the parents determined this was actually the Dunbar's child and gave custody over to them. The town had a parade for Bobby Dunbar's return. During the trial with the Dunbars and Walters, a woman named Julia Anderson came to defend Walters, asserting this was her son Bruce and she had given Walters custody. The courts dismissed her because she had 3 children out of wedlock. It was 1912, and 2 were already deceased. The trial being in Mississippi, and her being a very poor woman from North Carolina, she gave up on fighting the case. Then, 9 years ago in 2008, one of Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters had a DNA test done. She compared her grandfather's DNA to his own brother's. They were not related. Really late to the party, and not the creepiest. But definitely creepy. A kid in my high school disappeared after a heavy night of snow. Since he had to walk home every day, about 5 miles, police thought that he had gotten lost in one of the fields he crossed. Since the snow was almost a foot deep on some of these fields, there was nothing they could do except wait for the snow to clear. I believe there were some people who tried searching the fields. But by the time they cleared out one area, it was starting to fill back up with snow. And I also believe the landowners didn't want them in the fields without the police. So, come January, the snow had mostly cleared and police started looking again. Pretty quickly they found almost all of the kid's clothing apart from his shoes and his backpack. So now they were certain he was dead. Nobody could survive in the cold, especially in the middle of a field with nothing for 2 miles around him. Fast forward a year and it's starting to snow again. Not as heavy as the year before, but still 2 to 3 inches deep. A girl walking her dog, or more accurately the dog itself, found a pair of boots with human feet in them poking out of the snow. No connections were really made until a backpack was found nearby by the police, which contained all the boy's possessions. DNA from what was left of the feet found that it was indeed the boy who went missing. A DNA test proved that it was the boy. And what's even stranger is, his left foot was cut clean with a blade. And his right was mangled and chewed. As if it had been bitten/chewed off. I'm personally perplexed by the disappearance of a Japanese woman named Mayumi Arashi. The 27-year-old left her house stating that she was going to meet a certain classmate of hers and never returned. Her older sister, Yoko, later checked with this classmate, who stated that such a meeting was never promised, and thus never happened. Her whole family started searching for her, but to no avail. There was an investigation which pinned a guy called A as the prime suspect. This was due to another note that Mayumi left, stating how she had been betrayed and was sorry. In addition, Yoko stated that she had received a call from A who claimed to have met Mayumi that afternoon she disappeared, and wanted to be in jail if Mayumi ever turns up dead. The day after Mayumi's disappearance, police tailed A and found him entering a mountain or a foresty place or something carrying 2 cans of juice. The police then lost track of him. Now, it would seem like Mayumi's family, especially her sister Yoko, were extremely cooperative in helping the police, and that A was the prime suspect. This case blew up over the internet after an interview with the father. A news station went to interview the family over this case, and upon interviewing the father, many internet users spotted a mysterious note posted on a wall behind him that the news crew failed to catch. The note, in Mayumi's handwriting, said, "Don't trust what Yoko says."